Thank you very much. I think that at this point in the evening, it is worth asking, why is all this happening? What on earth is going on in America and in the world that we are facing this threat? And one of the strangest things about it is that so few people even acknowledge that there's a threat at all. And I'll give you an example of that. Pamela talked about the Fort Hood Jihad and Major Nidal Malik Hassan, an army psychiatrist who murdered 13 Americans in cold blood in the name of Islam at Fort Hood. What is less well known was that not long before that, there was actually an unsuccessful jihad plot at Fort Dix. And at Fort Dix, a group of Muslims had planned to enter the fort and shoot as many Americans as they possibly could before they themselves would get killed. It was a suicide mission. It was foiled, and let me tell you how it was foiled. What happened was, there was a young man working at a video store who foiled the whole plot. And so he's one of the unsung American heroes in this war. But this is what happened. These guys, these jihadis, went into this video store because they had a whole series of VHS tapes of blood and death and gore, of jihad beheadings and suicide attacks and all sorts of horrible things. And they loved this stuff. And so they wanted to get the VHS tapes transferred onto DVD. And so they went down to the local video store. The young guy who was working there, he's doing his job, and he's transferring these VHS tapes to DVD, and he's horrified by what he sees. And so the first thing he did was he went to the store manager, and he said, I'm seeing these horrible blood-curdling things on these VHS tapes. Should I go to the police, or would that be racist? Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine in 1943 if a bunch of Nazis in the United States had gone to some place with Nazi material and it was found out? Do you think that any American would have ever hesitated for a second to go to law enforcement and get these guys arrested? But this is the number that they've done on us. That so many people, and I know that all of you here tonight know many people among your friends and family who think that what we are doing tonight in exploring this threat and discussing it is racist, bigoted, Islamophobic, hateful, you name it. How has this happened? What on earth has happened to us? In order to understand that, I'm going to step back just a little bit and take us to 7th century Arabia. It's a virtual tour. And explain what it is about Islam, what it is about Muslims that makes this problem happen. As most of you probably know, Islam began in the 7th century. According to Islamic tradition, a man named Muhammad, who was 40 years old, 6'10", he was praying by himself in a cave near the city of Mecca in Arabia, and the angel Gabriel appeared to him. Those of you who read the New Testament are probably quite familiar with the angel Gabriel as the one who appeared to Mary and told her she would be the mother of Jesus. And Muslims say this is the same angel who appeared to Muhammad. Now, in the first place, actually Kelly mentioned I have a book coming out and I'd be happy to tell you about it. Well, yes. In fact, all of these things are historical legends. None of this really happened. The book that's coming out on April 23rd is called Did Muhammad Exist? And what most people don't know is that he didn't. Or if he did, there was a person named Muhammad. What we know about him is so covered over by historical legends that he's kind of like King Arthur or Robin Hood, in the sense that there may have been a real person back there, but we can't really know anything about him. And that's what the new book is. But obviously, at the same time, we all know that Muslims believe that all this is real, that Muhammad existed, and there is quite extensive material about him in Islamic tradition. And if you go back to the earliest Islamic sources, it's very interesting. The first story that is in the Hadith, the traditions of Muhammad's words and deeds, that are second only to the Quran in authority for Muslims, and the most authoritative Hadith collection, Sahih Bukhari, says in the very first thing, stories, some of the very earliest stories that Muslims told about how all this started. The angel Gabriel is not identified as such. It is an unidentified being who appears to Muhammad and commands him to recite. And so he thinks, recite, well, that means I must be reading from a text. And so he says, I can't read, how can I recite? And this being will have none of it and says, recite! And he's, look, I still can't read. I can't do it. And the angel, or whatever it was, pressed him so hard, the story says, that he thought he was going to die. And he was terrified, absolutely frightened out of his skin. And the angel said, recite. And he said, okay. And he went home shivering, the story says. And he said to his wife, Khadija, he said, woe is me, either poet or possessed. Now, poet, he didn't mean he was like T.S. Eliot. He thought poet in those days was somebody who had ecstatic visions, kind of hallucinations, maybe a little crazy, or possessed by a devil. Those were the choices that Muhammad first thought, according to Islamic tradition, of what was happening to him. But ultimately, he did come to believe, and that's a very interesting story in itself, that it was the angel Gabriel, and that he was a prophet, and this being, whatever it was, appeared to him over the next 23 years and gave him the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Now in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, it says, this is the same message. This is nothing new. This is the same message that Moses received, that David, that Solomon, Jesus even received. It's the same. It is confirming the Torah and the gospel. Now, there was a little problem with that. And this is, here again, all according to Islamic tradition. Muhammad had to deal with the fact that there were Jews and Christians in Arabia at that time. There aren't any now, which is all connected to this story. But at that time, there were 3 powerful Jewish tribes in Medina, Christians all over the place. And he went to them and he said, I'm your new prophet, and I've got these revelations from Gabriel, and they are the word of God. And the Jews said, well, you're not even Jewish. How could you be a Jewish prophet? And the Christians said, Jesus said it is finished on the cross, and that's it. And so how could you be a prophet? And they both turned him away. Now, at that point, he had 2 choices, right? What would you do if you had been Muhammad, God forbid? What would you do? You could say, oh, well, my mistake. I guess I'm not a prophet. How embarrassing. And go home. Or you could say, it's even worse than I thought. You people have dared to corrupt your own scriptures. You have taken the word of God that your prophets gave you, and you have twisted it to erase the material about me, and to change the teachings of your scriptures so that they no longer reflect what I'm saying. And that's what he did. Now, so far, this is just a theological disagreement. And there are several religions in the world that say that they are the only true religion. Islam is one of them. But there's a twist with Islam. In the Bible, it says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay, right? Have you ever heard that? Now, in Islam, vengeance is the Muslims. They are charged. They have a divine responsibility as they see it. In their holy book that they believe is the absolute dictated words of God, word for word, spoken by Allah and given through Gabriel to Muhammad, they have a divine responsibility to enforce the wrath of God. And to do it not obviously in the next life, but in this life. The Quran says that the non-believers will suffer hellfire, and hellfire is lavishly and extensively described in the Quran. They will drink molten lead and they will have their skins burnt off, and then Allah will give them new skins so that He can torture them some more. But not only will they suffer in hellfire, they're going to suffer right now in this world. And who's going to make sure they suffer right now in this world? The Muslims. How are the Muslims going to make them suffer in this world? According to the Quran, Muslims have a divine responsibility, a responsibility before Allah, to make war against the Jews and the Christians primarily, everybody else as well. But the Jews and the Christians are specifically mentioned as the people of the book in chapter 9 verse 29 of the Quran as being those against whom the Muslims must fight in order to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law. And the idea, see, is that the subjugation is manifested by the fact that they are denied basic rights, that they suffer discrimination, harassment, and humiliation on a daily basis and on an institutionalized and legal basis. Not just as a matter of an aberration or some people getting carried away or angry, but as an institutionalized legal requirement that the non-Muslims have to suffer in this world. The Jews and the Christians have to suffer deprivation. They have to pay a tax that the Muslims are exempt from paying. They have to remember the Jim Crow laws in the Old South. Islam invented all that. They have to step off the sidewalk if a Muslim is coming. In some places, they were not allowed to wear shoes or to ride horses. They had to be always reminded in a daily manner, in a regular manner, that they were renegades who had rejected the true faith and were enemies of God. They could not build new houses of worship or repair old ones so that their communities would be in a perpetual state of decline. They had to never hold authority over Muslims so that they would always be in the most menial positions in society. Now this is Islamic law. This has never changed because the Sharia, Islamic law, is considered by Muslims to be the law of Allah Himself. And you know they're the Ten Commandments. We have the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are not subject to a vote. I could poll you today and you could say, well, we really don't like that sixth one or seventh one or eighth one. Let's throw that one out. Yes? It's 56%? Okay, it's gone. Doesn't work. It's not negotiable. As far as Muslims are concerned, all of Islamic law is like that. Every bit of it. And Islamic law is not just about religious practices for Muslims, although it certainly includes that. It's not about how to perform the rituals properly. It's not about weddings and funerals and all that, although all that's in there. It is a comprehensive legal system that covers every aspect of life. There is nothing that you do in your day-to-day life, nothing that you've ever done that there's not a law for in Sharia. And a right way to do it, an Islamic way to do it. There's an Islamic toothbrush. I kid you not, it's actually not a toothbrush at all. It's a stick of wood. A miswak is a particular kind of wood. And that's the Islamic toothbrush. If you're not brushing your teeth with a miswak, then you're not a real Muslim. But it's not just about brushing your teeth either. It covers political aspects, societal aspects, the governance of the state, and it asserts authority over non-Muslims. And obviously it has to assert authority over non-Muslims because the non-Muslims, remember, have to be made to feel their rebellion from Allah and rejection of Muhammad and their evil for having corrupted their own scriptures and changed the teachings of the Muslim prophets, Moses and Jesus. And so, Islamic law, the primary idea of it, as far as non-Muslims are concerned, is to make sure that we are in a state of subjugation and that the Muslims have special rights, special privileges, that the non-Muslims do not enjoy, must not enjoy. That's the whole idea of it. And so think about some of the things, some of the examples that Pamela gave you earlier. The various workplaces, the businesses where they are making the requirements that Muslims have special break times. This was J.B. Swift Company in Greeley, Colorado. Muslims have the special breaks for their prayers that the non-Muslims don't have. And the non-Muslims actually complained about that. They complained about discrimination. They said, we have to work longer hours to make up for these guys, taking these extra breaks that we can't have. But see, that's the whole idea. The whole idea is not about prayer. As Pamela noted, in Muslim countries, they don't stop 5 times a day. In Saudi Arabia, they do. But in most Muslim countries, they make up the prayers at the end of the day. In most Muslim countries, they don't have foot baths in public places for Muslims to wash their feet before they pray. In America, they're putting them in at public expense in airports and universities. But not in Muslim countries. And see, the whole idea is not about the foot baths or about the prayers. That's not the point. The whole idea is not about getting the right to wear the hijab in the workplace if it's against the uniform. Those are all just details. The whole point of these initiatives is to establish the precedent, establish the principle that wherever there are Muslims and non-Muslims, the Muslims have special rights that the non-Muslims don't have. Because that's Islamic law. The stealth jihad is the working out of the Islamic imperative to subjugate non-Muslims by nonviolent means. Instead of mounting terror attacks, they are doing various cultural and societal initiatives, such as the ones that we combat, in order to establish the principle that wherever Islamic law and American law conflict, it's American law that has to give way. Wherever Islamic practice and American practice conflict, it's American practice has to go. And the whole idea in every case is to make sure that the Muslims have the special privileges. Islamic law is the only legal system of a religious nature. It's often compared. You will hear in terms of these anti-Sharia laws that are being deliberated in various states. You will hear the Islamic supremacist groups saying we can't have these laws because they'll infringe upon Muslim religious freedom and First Amendment rights. We can't have these laws because Islamic law is just a religious thing that doesn't have any political aspect. Well, that's a lie to start with. But the principle, you see, is always that non-Muslims have to obey Islamic law. Jewish law, to which this is always compared, Catholic canon law, to which this is always compared, they do not assert authority over non-believers. They do not assert authority over non-Jews or non-Catholics. Islamic law does. And so there's so many instances where this has happened. But see, they are all separate, discrete instances in various places around the country, and they're being done among people who are clueless, who are being clubbed over the head all the time with the idea that it is racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic to speak about these things or to resist them. And so they're going forward. For example, in Chicago, there was a school district where the Muslim students had to eat Jell-O at lunchtime in the public schools. Can you imagine the horror? Now, do you remember, I went to public schools all my life. Do you remember some of those public school lunches? I mean, there were some things on there I wouldn't want to give the dog to eat. And so, what did I do? Well, I filed suit, of course. You remember, when you were in school, if there was something on the school lunch you didn't want to eat, you didn't eat it. You threw it away. Big deal. The Muslim students, they had Jell-O on their plates. Now Jell-O, I found out actually as a result of this, is pork. Who knew? Jell-O is made from gelatin, which is made from pork hooves. So it's pork hoof congeal. Anyway, I'm sorry, the Jell-O Corporation is going to sue me now. But they not only did not want to eat the Jell-O, they got it banned from the school district. So what if there's a non-Muslim kid who likes the stuff? Too bad. And see, the point of the story, obviously, it's not about Jell-O or school lunches. The point is to assert the principle that we have to obey Islamic law and practice. In Minneapolis, there was a famous case a few years back, you may recall, where the Muslim cab drivers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport were refusing to carry people if they had alcohol. And so, people would go into the duty-free shops and they'd come out with a bottle of scotch or whatever. They wouldn't carry them. And the problem was that 99% of the cabs in Minneapolis were driven by Muslims. And so the airport was going to fold. And they said, okay, we'll have Sharia cabs and non-Sharia cabs. And so here again, 99 Sharia cabs, 1 non-Sharia cab. You're standing there with your bottle of scotch. You're waiting 5 hours to get home from the airport. So the Muslims, they said, this is about our religious freedom. We just want to exercise our religion. Islamic law not only forbids the drinking of alcohol, but the transportation of alcohol, any contact with alcohol, anything having to do with it. And people said, oh yes, it's their religious freedom. You can't make them do this. It's not about religious freedom. This is about political supremacism. We have a system of government and laws in the United States. And the great genius of the founding fathers was not to establish a religion. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. They understood that there were people in the United States, even at the time of the founding, who differed in conscience on the basic questions. And so they thought, well, we could have an established religion, like they do in many places in Europe, and that means your tax money goes to whatever church or whatever institution, and maybe you're not a member of it. And that church or whatever institution gets special privileges that the others don't get. And the founding fathers thought, well, we're not going to favor one group over another like that. And we're not going to have people constantly warring for hegemony, as they have been in many places in the world throughout history. And so we're going to establish non-establishment and have people living together in harmony without trying to kill each other, even if they may differ in conscience. And this was a beautiful thing. This was a masterful thing. Because, well, maybe it would be nice if we all saw eye to eye, but we don't. And we're not going to. And so, if we just leave each other alone, and we put up with each other, and we can live together, well, we made this into the greatest country on earth. Now, the Islamic imperative is absolutely opposed to this. It's absolutely opposed to these principles. It was in Minneapolis whether they were going to accept that there are non-Muslims in society and we are a non-Muslim society, or whether we were going to accommodate Islamic law. Now in that case, ultimately, because of public pressure that we brought, that was not done there, but it's happening all over the country. Everywhere that it is happening under the auspices of Muslim Brotherhood groups. I wrote a book called Stealth Jihad in 2008 that sketches this out. And Pamela has a great deal more about it that's updated in her book, Stop Islamization of America, which is out here. That everywhere that these societal initiatives are going on, it turns out that the Muslim American Society or the Council on American Islamic Relations or the Islamic Society of North America is behind these groups that are protesting. Obviously, it wasn't the kids in Chicago who were suing about the Jell-O. It was their parents and the Muslim American Society behind them. And it was the Muslim American Society behind them in Minneapolis with the cabs as well. The Muslim American Society is the chief organization of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood, as you know, is taking over in Egypt now. And it's an organization that was founded in Egypt. It is dedicated to restoring the political aspects of Islam. It was actually founded in 1928. In 1924, the caliphate was abolished. The caliph was the successor of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leader of the Muslims. And in 1924, the secular Turkish government Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was the founder of secular Turkey, which is now on its last legs. He was one of really the only Muslim leader in the history of Islam who has realized that his country was wrecked because of Islam. That because of the endless wars, because of the fact that Islam has no work ethic, but lives off the jizya, the tax that the non-Muslims have to pay, the Ottoman Empire fell. And the secular Turkish government that followed it, Ataturk was determined to make modeled after Western pluralistic republics and not on Islam. And so he abolished the caliphate, which is like as momentous a thing as if an army were to go into Rome and depose the Pope and say, no more Pope. And there hasn't been a caliph since 1924, but in 1928, al-Banna established the Brotherhood in order to reassert political Islam. He thought it was a terrible thing what Ataturk had done, that Ataturk was an enemy of Islam, which he was, and that the Brotherhood was going to put it all right again and reunite the Islamic world under a new caliphate and spread Islamic law over the world. And now they have their best chance, thanks to Barack Obama, as Pamela said, they have their best chance that they've ever had to do just that. But also, the Brotherhood is an international organization. It is not just in Egypt, it's not just in the Middle East, the Muslim Brotherhood is here. And the chief arm of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States is the Muslim American Society, also the Council on American Islamic Relations. And every time we see these stealth jihad initiatives, we happen to see one of these Brotherhood groups behind them. Now the Brotherhood, a few years back, had a meeting and mapped out its strategy and goals for the United States. This was a private meeting. The press was not invited. I wasn't there. Only Brotherhood members were there. But as it happened, during the Holy Land Foundation trial, it all came out. The Holy Land Foundation was, a few years back, the largest Islamic charity in the United States. A charity, right? Isn't that nice? You know, feeding the poor, taking care of the needy. Well, actually, they were giving the money to Hamas. The Holy Land Foundation was shut down, and their offices were raided, and it was a great moment. It was a beautiful thing because we found out more about Muslim Brotherhood operations in the United States from the documents that were recovered from the Holy Land Foundation offices than we ever knew before. And this document about their strategic goals for the United States was one of the things that was uncovered. And it's, in first place, it contained a helpful list of the Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the United States. And so that's how I know that the Muslim American Society, Islamic Society of North America, Council on American Islamic Relations, etc., are Brotherhood groups. And it also said that the brothers must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house so that Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. Now you see, that's just standard Islam. People say, oh no, that's extremist, radical, twisted, hijacked religion of peace. That's not the real thing. But no, actually, as I explained to you before, and I have documented over and over again in all sorts of venues and in all sorts of books, the fact is that the Quran teaches that the Muslims have the responsibility to subjugate the unbelievers, that this is a universal and open-ended command for all time. And so the Brotherhood says that we're eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. That's entirely in accord with Muhammad's imperative that he enunciated. He said, I have been commanded to fight against people, just everyone, until they confess that there is no God but Allah and that I am his messenger. So anyway, the Brotherhood organizations in the United States are essentially all the major Islamic organizations in the United States, and they are working very skillfully, very cleverly on these stealthy initiatives to assert Islamic law over American law. And one of the main things they're doing, as Pamela explained, is making war against the freedom of speech and making it so that Americans, decent Americans, are afraid to speak out about this, and that young guy in the video store is afraid to go to the police. He did ultimately, but he initially hesitated to go to the police because he was afraid it might be racist to do so. The Muslim Brotherhood in the United States is carrying out the imperative of Islamic law that stipulates for those subjugated non-Muslims that they must not mention anything impermissible about Quran, Muhammad, or Islam. Now, what's impermissible? Many times I have been accused of slandering Islam. And that's a very interesting phrase because, if I asked you, what's slander? You would say, well, if you're telling lies about me, you're slandering me, right? But if you go to Islamic legal manuals in the United States that are available in English, like most notably one that Pamela mentioned, Reliance of the Traveler, Umdat as-Salik, which is a very revealing compendium of Islamic law that is endorsed by Al-Azhar University, which is one of the foremost institutions in Sunni Islam. Go to the definition of slander, and it says slander is mentioning something about someone that they don't want known. So it may be true, you see, but they don't want it out there. What Pamela and I are doing is telling the truths that they don't want out there. And so they are trying to enforce on all Americans the principle that it is not permitted for us to speak out about Islam, Quran, or Muhammad. It is not allowed under Islamic law for the subjugated dhimmis, the subservient people, the non-Muslims under the rule of Islamic law, to speak out about the truth about Islam. It's not permissible. It's getting out of line. It's being uppity. We have to know our place, and our place is chastened subservience and silence about all the murders and the oppressions and the supremacist gestures like the Ground Zero Mosque. We have the Ground Zero Mosque film out here, and it's my favorite movie, really. I can tell you, I've seen it like 50 times, and so it's sort of like I know what everybody's going to say and yell at the screen before they say it. And it's a grim topic, but it's very important. It's extraordinarily important because it epitomizes the entire Muslim Brotherhood operation in the United States. The Ground Zero Mosque, people have forgotten about, but it still could be built. We slowed them down. We may have stopped them altogether. The Ground Zero Mosque, initially they announced they were going to break ground, they were going to tear down the building that's part of Ground Zero, where one of the landing gear from one of the planes flew into the roof of the building. And they announced that they were going to tear down that building and build a 16-story mega mosque and break ground on September 11th, 2011. Well, they didn't. They still haven't torn down that building. And they still don't have the funding. I think that a lot of the people who were going to fund it were scared off by the adverse publicity, by 70% of Americans opposing this. But the thing is, everywhere that jihad has been victorious, Muslims build a triumphal mosque. That's why there's a mosque on the Temple Mount, to show the victory of Islam. That's why Hagia Sophia, which was once the grandest church in the whole Christian world, was converted to a mosque. That was the first thing that Mehmet the Conqueror did when he went into that building on Tuesday, May 29th, 1453. He got a muezzin to go up to the pulpit and to proclaim there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, and it was a mosque. And it was a triumphal mosque to show the victory of Islam over the Christian Byzantine Empire. That was a triumphal mosque that they were trying to build there. And they were doing it under our noses and charging bigotry, hatred, and racism to scare off people from opposing them. And they almost got away with it. And they still might. They could come back unless we wake up to this threat. So I urge you to take a look at this movie, really, because we have a tremendous work, as Pamela explained, to do to wake up our friends and neighbors. This hall should be filled. And there should be 20 other speakers coming in after us and saying the same thing, and the hall filled for them. But they are lulling us to sleep and saying, well, no, it's a religion of peace. This terrible massacre of Jewish school children in Toulouse, France, And the first thing the president of France, Sarkozy, does is go on the air today and say, this has nothing to do with Islam. And he feels like he has to say that, or the Muslims will say he's racist and bigoted, and then he'll suffer in the polls and maybe not get reelected. So what? And he thinks he has to be nice to all the peaceful Muslims. Well, what are they doing? Look, let's think back for a minute. It's 10 years, more than 10 years now since 9/11. Where is the big Muslim organization full of huge crowds fighting against jihad and Islamic supremacism and actually making good on the claim that they're really moderate and oppose all that? Where are they? Nowhere. There is not one. They're not standing up. They're not doing anything to fight against the jihadis among them or supremacists among them. And there's a reason for that. They know that the Quran teaches this. They know Muhammad taught this. They know it far better than most Americans do. And so they're not going to stand up and speak out against the religion they believe. The Ground Zero Mosque was a tremendous example of how the Muslim Brotherhood has cowed and intimidated politicians, how it has taken complete control of the mainstream media. Pamela wrote an article about the guidelines of the Society of Professional Journalists, where it says you can never mention Islam and terrorism together. And you know, I track this at Jihad Watch every day, and I see thousands of jihad stories come across the transom all the time. And they're usually, universally, they're the people who did them, it's militants, insurgents, youths, never Muslims, jihadis. Although the guy might be screaming Allahu Akbar and giving out Qurans of that morning like Major Hassan. What they want us to do is to be quiet and complacent and go quietly into the night of our subjugation. What they want to do is erase us. What they want to do is do what they are doing to women who they kill for honor. What they want to do is do what they are doing to the non-Muslims in Muslim countries. The women they kill for honor. You know, Pamela and I, the first thing we started work on was a memorial for Aqsa Parvez. Aqsa Parvez was a young lady in Mississauga, Ontario. And she was murdered by her father, strangled to death by her father because she didn't want to wear the Islamic hijab, the headscarf. In Islam, if a girl, there's no penalty, as Pamela noted. There's no penalty for a parent who kills a child. And a girl, especially, who gets out of line, who commits or is even believed to have committed some kind of sexual indiscretion, she has brought shame on the family. That shame has to be cleansed. Well, they don't have repentance and forgiveness in Islam. The shame has to be cleansed by her being killed. So this young girl was killed in Canada. When Pamela found out that she was buried in an unmarked grave because the family was complicit. You know, it wasn't the father did it, but the mother knew what he was doing. The brother was involved with the father killing the girl. And so they wanted to forget about her. She didn't exist. She was the shame of the family. And so there was no headstone. Pamela found out about it and she thought, this is an injustice. This is an outrage. This is a horror. This was a human being. This is a human being with a soul who deserves to be remembered. And I thought, wow, you know, nobody else is taking on honor killing like that. Nobody else is standing in the entire Western world and saying this is an abomination and we're not going to stand for it and we're going to fight against it. She was the first one. People, yeah, sure, people write about it, you know, and they say it's a terrible thing. Most of the time they're excusing it. They're denying that it has any Islamic connection and so on and so on. But who's fighting it? Pamela Geller. And so I thought that was an amazing thing. And I said, well, let me help you out with this. And I'll put it up at Jihad Watch also. We took up a collection to get this poor girl a headstone. And then you know what happened? We got a headstone designed, and it said Aqsa Parvez with the dates, beloved, remembered, and free. Very simple thing, beautiful thing. The family wouldn't let us put it there. And then, because Pamela never gives up, she was talking to the guy at the cemetery and said, okay, I want to buy the next plot right next to it. And And they wouldn't allow that. And she said, okay, how about a tree? I'll put a marker on a tree. Nope, nothing. Not a stone, not a tree, not a fence, nothing in that whole cemetery. Why? Well, the Islamic Society of North America owns that cemetery. The Islamic Society of North America is Brotherhood. And so, no headstone. But still, she didn't give up. And what we ultimately did, we went last summer to Jerusalem. In an American Independence Park outside Jerusalem, there's now a grove of trees in honor of Aqsa Parvez and all victims of honor killing. And you might say, well, how does that stop honor killing? It does a great deal. In the first place, it makes the first and only, so far, public statement, except for the other initiatives that we've done, one of the only public statements that this will not stand in the West, that we're going to remember these girls that they want us to forget. We're going to remember these girls that they say don't exist. We are not going to stand for, in a larger sense, the imposition of Islamic law. We're going to make a public stand against it. We're going to speak out. We are not going to accept the attitude of chastened subservience they want us to accept. We are going to make a public stand for justice, for human rights, for the dignity of the human person, for equality for all people, for the freedom of speech, for the freedom of conscience, and we're never going to give up. And see, this drives them crazy because they've never had any resistance before. Sure, there's all sorts of counterterrorism efforts, but they're all devoted, and I applaud these efforts, absolutely. They're all devoted to making sure there's not another terrorist attack. And many, many jihad plots have been foiled. You may know that there's been a tremendous spike since Barack Obama was inaugurated president in jihad plots in the United States. And there have been more jihad plots in the United States since Barack Obama became president than there were in all the years combined between 9/11 and his inauguration. Now, that's great, but there's no resistance to the stealth jihad. Nobody even knows it's going on. There's no resistance to these cultural and societal imperatives. There's no resistance to the idea that the non-Muslims have to accommodate Islamic law. There's no resistance to the idea that if you speak out about this, you're some sort of a hate monger instead of a freedom fighter and a defender of human rights. There's no resistance. We're it. Now, the thing about this is, as Pamela said, we're it. We're it in this room. This is not a war with uniforms and soldiers and guns on the battlefield. This is a war in our homes, in our societies, in our communities. There's a mosque right here. I was talking to the gentleman here earlier, and he was telling me about the mosque that you have here in Denver. Probably you have several. Who runs them? Do you know? What kind of speakers are they bringing in? Do you know? Why not? Who's going to fight against this? Who's going to fight against the spread of Sharia and Islam in Denver but you? If you don't, ain't nobody going to. It's up to us. And so I will conclude in exactly the same way that Pamela did, by emphasizing that we are all the soldiers in this fight. And her book, Stop the Islamization of America, has tremendous practical suggestions and tips on what to do, what you can do in your own place with your own time, your own talents, your own resources, what pitfalls to avoid, many, many things. It's a very rich resource. And so, remember, our founding fathers in the United States of America, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they said that to this great struggle, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. If we are not willing to do the same, then we are going to lose the freedoms they won for us. Thanks very much.